Hi, this is Eric Roach from Seabrook, New Hampshire, and this is a quick presentation on successfully shad fishing the Merrimack River. As an introduction to American shad species name is Alosa sapidissima, which is Latin for the most savory herring. Shad are the largest member of the herring family. They're sea-dwelling, but return to freshwater to spawn. I believe that's called anadromous. American shad survive the spawn in the Merrimack River, at least, and they do eat during the spawn. The history and importance of American shad include their high regard as a sport fish. They have a long history of commercial importance, especially in the mid-Atlantic states. And part of the history includes their role in preventing starvation at Valley Forge during the American Revolution. Purportedly, shad run in the spring stove off starvation for Washington's troops, which I think is a great little aspect of their history. The population of American shad is densest in the East Coast, north of Cape Hatteras, with Chesapeake tributaries and the Delaware River having the largest runs. As a comparison to what historically have been large runs and what we consider large runs today, the Delaware River used to support a run of about 50 million. This is back in the 19th century. That run averages around 200,000 now. And as mentioned, the American shad in the south die after spawning. The further south that you go into Florida and around into the Gulf Coast states, the majority of those shad do die after the spawn. In the northern states, as far going further north around Cape Breton Island into the Gulf of St. Lawrence, those fish do survive the spawn. Unfortunately, an all too familiar story with some of our fisheries. This is some commercial catch data from 1950 to 2007. You can see the declining trend. In the 1990s, it really started getting down low. There's a lot of supposed reasons for American shad's fluctuation in population. One of them being the suspected bycatch for midwater trawlers that are going after sea herring. But unfortunately, they're nowhere near the numbers they used to be in the past. The edibility of American shad, they are delicate and flavorful. Their roe is a delicacy. You don't see too many people in the Merrimack area actually keeping these fish. Even though they're very high in omega-3, they're very healthy fish, and they're low in toxins. And I understand from the regional biologist for the Massachusetts Division of Marine Fisheries that the Merrimack River sampled shad are very healthy and do not have a lot of heavy metals or any kind of pollutants in their skin. They are, however, very bony and difficult to clean, which might be one of the reasons why you don't see them consumed too much up here. In the Mid-Atlantic, some of the fisheries, fish markets, the fish cleaners make their reputation off of being able to cleanly clean American shad. In this picture here, these American shad are being planked. They are attached or nailed into cedar planks and put against an open fire to be cooked. And I understand this is how the American Indians ate American shad. The size of American shad, adults weigh their average from 3 to 8 pounds. Gravid females are the heaviest, gravid meaning that they are egg-laden, they have eggs for the spawn. And in the drawing that you see here, which was done in the 19th century, I boxed the area between the, I believe it's the anal and ventral fin, that has the belly has a slight protrusion. That's the egg area right there, and obviously if a female is carrying eggs like that, she's bound to be heavier. The Massachusetts state record is 11 pounds and 4 ounces. That's also the IGFA world record. That was a fish caught in 1986 in the Connecticut River. Also Massachusetts, if you go after the sport fishing pins, for adults, you're eligible for a pin for an American shad over 5 pounds, and in the youth division, you're eligible for a pin if the shad is over 3 pounds. Massachusetts regulations for American shad. The season is open year-round. They're really only typically caught in their run in the rivers. The creel limit is 6, but a gentleman for the Massachusetts Division of Marine Fisheries mentioned yesterday that creel limit might be dropped to 3 as a way to help protect the species. They have no minimum size. And my last bullet shows a freshwater license is needed upstream of Groveland, and there's been some debate about this slide when it was presented at the Plum Island Surfcasters meeting. I understand from that gentleman from the Division of Marine Fisheries that the head of tide in the Merrimack is actually the first 495 bridge over the Merrimack, which is in Haverhill. So a little further upstream from the picture that you're seeing here, this is Groveland, this is Haverhill. I believe it's this bridge right here. Once you cross over that bridge, you need a freshwater license on this side, and downstream of the bridge you would need a saltwater license to fish for shad. We're going to talk about three main shad spots. One is in West Newbury, one is in North Andover, and one is in Lawrence. The only one that you can fish without a Massachusetts freshwater license is the West Newbury location. Numbers of shad in the Merrimack River. This is a table of shad counts at the Essex Dam in Lawrence. Since 1983, when the fish lift went in, they would corral fish into the fish lift and lift them up and physically count them before they were passed upstream. And that started in 1983, and I have data up to 2012 here. You can see that the numbers, the count has varied wildly year to year. The highest count was in 2001 at 76,000, almost 77,000 fish. In 2006, only 1,200 fish were passed over the dam. If you remember, 2006 was the big Mother's Day flood where it rained for 3 weeks and the water was tearing over the dam there. And I don't know if I think the fish lift was actually inoperable for a period of time during that heavy rain. But the year before, when there wasn't flooding issues, you can see there were only 6,000 fish as compared to 76. In 2012, we had a run of 21,000 fish that came a little later in the season. We'll talk about the season for shad in a second. So you do see it go up and down quite a bit from year to year. When you do start shad fishing, you never know what you're going to get for quantity. Shad season, the run begins in April when the Merrimack River temp approaches about 50 degrees. And this is one of the great correlations of shad fishing and other aspects of nature. Forsythia, which is this bush right here, and serviceberry. The serviceberry is really called the shad bush up in the northeast here, up our way. Some people refer to Forsythia as shad bush. The blooms do correlate with run. When these start to flower, the run is usually on. I think you can probably get shad before these really come into bloom. The run does peak in late May, and it dwindles by mid-June in the Merrimack. We're going to talk about some fishing spots now. The first one is Rocks Village in West Newbury. It's kind of funny because Rocks Village is actually a village across the river here in Haverhill. It's actually part of Haverhill. This picture is taken from the West Newbury side, probably at the boat launch on Ferry Park, and this is Rocks Bridge, which is currently under construction right now. So it's funny. I think all the shad spots are misnamed. We call this Rocks Village, but again, it's Ferry Park in West Newbury in case you're looking for it on a map. It's a great early season spot. It has easy access. There's plenty of parking. It's picturesque. It really is a nice, beautiful bend in the Merrimack River, and it's a great place to start your season. This is an aerial view of Rocks Village, just to get your bearings. This is East Main Street right here, and this street goes out to Route 113, Ferry Lane, and Church Street. And following this here will bring you down to downtown, quote-unquote, of West Newbury, and further down towards Groveland. Points of interest here. This is Rocks Bridge. This is the boat launch here at Ferry Landing. This is just a little protrusion here called the bump. We'll talk about why this spot's important in a moment. And a little further upstream here is an area that's covered by tarps. That's just to get your reference when you're down here at the water. The edge of Ferry Park pretty much begins where the tarps are covering some invasive grass. Parking in this spot is all along Church Street. This is actually a one-way street right here, and you can park on both sides. You can see the dirt turnouts here. There's a dirt turnout here as well. You can park right here along this little triangle. There's a picnic table in here. It's a nice little spot, so there's plenty of room for everybody. The current in this spot runs from left to right, and there's a big bend in the river that comes just off the screen here. And the river current comes down and it hits these protrusions and forms these rips coming off the boat launch in the bump. And that is why these are the prime fishing areas in this particular spot. Just upstream of the bump, as you get closer in as well, you can stand here and cast out. Around the bump this is all prime. You can fish we'll see in a second here where you can fish. There's plenty of room to fish, but these are the best spots. Around the boat launch is good as well. There's not a lot of room here, but you can get 2 or 3 guys out here fishing at the boat launch. The good fishing areas is the space in between the bump and the boat launch. Just downstream of the boat launch, about halfway down to the bridge, is where I've caught shad. Usually when I get beyond this point, I'm not picking anything up. And upstream of the bump, about halfway up or heading towards the tarps, I've caught shad out in this area here. This is really one big giant flat out here, and one of the reasons people consider this a good shad spot is downstream of Rocks Village. It's pretty narrow. The current's ripping through there. The shad have to fight the current to come up. So this is kind of a natural place to rest here in shallow water, which is good for us because they're easy to target from shore. Safety in this spot, under normal conditions, this is the safest place to fish out of the 3 we're going to talk about, especially upstream of the boat launch. Once you're upstream of the boat launch, this is all pretty shallow. You know, there's really no danger unless the water is very high in flood stage and it's ripping. I put a caution sign around the boat launch. There isn't a tremendous amount of current here, but again, if the water's up, the current's certainly stronger. It's kind of loose, gravelly rocks when you step off the boat ramp. And, you know, it's feasible that you could take a spill here, and if the water's really moving, you might take a ride downstream underneath the bridge. But for the most part, if you're going to bring kids shad fishing, this is the best place to bring them to. There's plenty of room, and it's shallow, and it's really hard to get in anything like trouble here. In this spot, the current is tidally influenced. The spot is mostly tide dependent for planning your fishing. The spot typically fishes best from the top of the outgoing until the middle of the dropping tide. Rainfall and runoff affect the tide turn. High river can mean current right through the incoming. So if it is in flood stage, or if there's a lot of runoff like we might expect in the spring of 2013 with all the snow, or if we're getting a lot of rain in the spring, the current, even though the tide is coming in, the current might still be going out. If there's current moving from left to right, the spot is fishable no matter how high or low the water is. The most accurate tides you are going to get for this spot is 1.5 miles downstream at Merrimack Port. A lot of commercial websites for tides don't include Merrimack Port in the Massachusetts tides. This is a QR code which hopefully you'll be able to hold your phone up here if you pause the video and take this, and this will bring you up the tide table for Merrimack Port in case you can't find it on the net. As mentioned, the parking is available along both sides of Church Street and the dirt turnouts. Be very careful parking at the boat ramp. If you interfere with anyone's use of the boat ramp, the police will ticket you automatically. I've seen people ticketed very quickly just by pulling up, walking out of the water. Cop comes right behind them and tickets them. So be very careful parking in that area. For the nearest bathroom, you'd want to follow Church Street into town. I didn't want to list any businesses because none of them are really for public bathrooms, but especially if you're with a child and you have an emergency, that's the best direction to head. The directions for Church Street are listed right here. Again, hopefully with your cell phone you can hold it up and obtain this QR code and be able to map out from where you are to this spot. I'm going to go back just for a moment here to the aerial photo. Again, this is Rocks Bridge right here. This bridge, I understand, as of this writing, or as of this recording, which is on March 20th, is closed for work. And I know they had this open one lane or alternating lanes with a light last year, but apparently it's closed, I'm told. And the only access in there is on the West Newbury side and primarily through 113 or from Groveland if you're coming in that direction. But you're not going to be able to get to it on the north. You're not going to be able to get here on the north side of the river unless you take a bridge downstream or upstream. Now the next spot we're going to talk about is called Spiro's, or referred to as Spiro's in North Andover. It's kind of funny that this is referred to as Spiro's because there used to be a restaurant on the property called Spiro's, but it is no longer. It's now a dance studio called Nancy Chippendale's Dance Studios. Most people still refer to this as Spiro's, however. This spot fishes very well through the whole run. It's not tide dependent, so there's no tidal movement in here. It's just river water coming down from the dam a little further upstream. You access it through this private business, so keep that in mind when you're here. You're on private property where you're parking, so please use etiquette and decorum. This is an aerial view of Spiro's, just to get our bearings here. The point of interest, this building right here is Nancy Chippendale's Dance Studio, and the parking area is right here. So try to use these spots just in the back. And this spot, just like Rocks Village, the current runs from left to right. And as you can see here, it kind of comes down and hits off this point and goes further downstream, and that forms a nice rip right here. And as we can see, that's our primary fishing area, which is great because it's very close to the parking area. This particular spot right up here is probably the absolute best, but there's only room for a couple of people. And I've seen and myself has experienced really good fishing along this whole stretch. The good fishing areas here are just upstream and downstream. There is a path going through the woods here that goes all the way down, and eventually the path peters out, and if you're at the water's edge you can't go any further just because it gets too deep and the brush is too heavy overhead. Upstream of this, about halfway or a little further up, maybe to this point, heading towards the 495 bridge, I've gotten my share of shad up here. I don't believe I've ever caught a shad north of the 495 bridge. I'm sure it's possible, but I usually just don't make the trek. Special safety concerns here. Under normal conditions, wading here is safe. In some spots it deepens quickly when you step in, like literally you're right at the water's edge, you take a step and it's up to your waist. When the water's up and moving, you can get into trouble easily here if you're wading, so you have to be careful. Probably the most dangerous part of this spot, though, is just in front of the parking area. There's a row of bushes here, and behind it is a stone embankment that's used for flood control when the Merrimack is high. And it's a little slick. The rocks are slick, and I've seen people take their fair share of tumbles down those rocks. So if you're bringing someone who might be older or someone has a hard time with their knees or whatnot, this is a tough spot to get to. I'd recommend they walk through the path down through the woods, and there's a little easier access down this way. Again, as mentioned, please park in the dance studio lot in these spots here. The closest bathroom is at Dunkin' Donuts. If you take a left out of the lot and follow it along, it's about a mile and a half up, and that's probably the best place to hit a bathroom. Here's a QR code for directions to the dance studio itself. The next spot we're going to talk about is the dam in Lawrence, the Essex Dam. This offers some of the best fishing. Access through Pemberton Park, which I'll show you here in a second. So this is an overhead of Pemberton Park, which is this area right here. This is an old bridge. This is Route 28 or Broadway right here, and this is the Joseph Casey Bridge down here. The dam is actually off the page here to the right, and if we show the points of interest, the fish elevator on the dam, or the fish lift, is up in this corner here. There's a boat launch that's accessible here, and the current in this spot runs from right to left instead of left to right. The prime fishing areas in this spot is the boat launch itself. One caveat with the boat launch is there's really only room for about 2, maybe 3 people if they know each other. As a result, I usually don't go down to the boat launch because, you know, sometimes, unless it's really early season shad fishing, people are down here striper fishing as well, and there's lead and lures flying all around you and stuff. But if the boat launch is wide open, it's a good spot to hit. Further downstream, though, this area right here is great fishing because as you cast out and it swings into this hole between these 2 bridge supports, and this particular depression seems to do very well with shad. The good fishing areas primarily is the space in between. I don't have it marked up here because this is very steep and very deep water right here next to the boat launch, but all along this stretch you can do well with shad. When the water is low, you can actually wade out towards the green line here where it's showing the current. You can wade almost all the way across if it's really low. And if we're able to get out from the boat launch and wade in this area and cast out here and swing, there can be great fishing to be had out there as well. Special safety concerns in this particular spot. Be very careful when the water is high. People do drown here. Every couple of years you hear about someone who fell in around the boat launch or one of these areas and got swept downstream and drowned. So always be careful around the boat launch no matter what. No matter what the water is doing, just consider that a high danger area. A special safety concern for this particular area is you got to be careful leaving anything expensive in your vehicle. I understand this also applies at Spiro's, which we just looked at. I've never had that experience at Spiro's, but I have heard that people have. I have seen cars here in downtown Lawrence, guys that have parked to go fishing. I've seen their windows smashed out. It's not common. In the past, it used to be really bad. You see much more of a police presence these days, but it's still a valid concern, so you do have to be careful. I don't bring anything expensive because I don't even want to have to hide it. You occasionally see guys riding around on bicycles looking in the car windows. Pretty skeevy looking people. So anything that you aren't bringing fishing with you, it's best to leave it at home. As mentioned, best place to park is the most visible areas possible. And again, although not as bad as the past theft, is still a valid concern. This will give you directions to Pemberton Park if you can scan that. And now we're going to talk about gear and tackle. Now, some of this is pretty basic fishing stuff. I'll just go through it quickly. Neoprene waders are good in April. The water temps are only around 50. All spots have slick rocks. Felt or river stud boots are preferred to lug soles. You got to be really careful with lug soles at any of these spots. It's just like standing on ice. When the water warms up in mid to late May, you can switch to wet wading. The water really warms up quite a bit up there. And, just some general reminders. This might be your first fishing of the year, so make sure you remember your sunscreen or you get your first burn of the year. And then your basic gear, polarized glasses, hat, licenses, etc. For rods, and you see it all when you're out shad fishing. It's just amazing the variety of gear people will use. You see 4.5 foot ultralight rods, bass flipping sticks, to light surf casting outfits. I've even seen some heavy surf casting outfits, which is pretty crazy to watch. You see a giant 11-foot rod with a, a shad dart on it. Maybe the best overall choice is a spinning outfit marketed towards light freshwater bass fishing. My favorite shad rod is a St. Croix Avid, this model right here. It's rated for 1/8 to 3/8 of an ounce. It'll cast up and over 5/8 ounce, but it's soft enough to absorb a lunge. Also, with a 1/2 ounce weight or a 3/8 ounce weight with a dart or a flutter spoon, it really gets out there. If you do see people fly fishing, fly rods commonly range from 4 to 6 weights, with probably 6 being the more common. Reels and line, you see quite a diversity, including light bait casters. That's really only for the skilled, because what you're throwing is so incredibly light. You really need to know what you're doing to avoid getting backlashed. The best overall reel is a light spinning reel marketed towards a 6-pound line class, and the line is typically 6-pound mono. If you want to try 4, it'll cost you fish. You will snap off bigger hens and also lures. 8-pound will cost you some distance, so you really don't need 8 for shad fishing. My favorite setup, which is a little overkill for this type of fishing, is a Penn Slammer 260 with 6-pound fire line spooled on it. That's what I like to use. Shad fishing typically uses a leader rig, and these are the aspects of the leader rig, including some recommended lengths. So at the end is our flutter spoon, dart, or jig. Here's our offering. It is attached to the leader with a micro snap or non-slip mono loop knot, and that's to ensure that the offering has maximum movement. The leader length itself is usually 12 to 24 inches of 6-pound test. It's connected to your running line or your main line with a very small swivel. And the casting weight is this inline weight, and the average weights range from 1/8 to a half an ounce. And half an ounce is good when the water's up, or if you're fishing Lawrence and the current's strong. Again, the main line being about 6 pounds. So this is your prototypical shad leader rig. What I use for terminal tackle in my rig, I use Excalibur tungsten barrel weights. As you know, considered when you're above the saltwater mark, which again is in Haverhill. You cannot use lead in the river. You can't use lead as casting weights. You can't use lead for lures either. So you really, if you're using darts, we'll talk about lures here in a moment. If you're using darts, you need to use tin. So instead of lead anywhere that I'm fishing, I use tungsten barrel weights. You can use brass. You can use anything. I like tungsten because it's smaller and more dense. I feel I get a better cast out of it. I use Spiro power swivels. They're very small. They're number 10s, but they're rated to 35 pounds. They're incredibly strong little swivels. For leader material, I like to use Seaguar fluorocarbon. It's really not necessary. A lot of guys use nylon monofilament. That's fine. I like the extra abrasion resistance. And to attach the lure to my leader, I use these little no-knot fast snaps, which I get from Cabela's. They're size medium. They're very small, but they're great. They're easy to switch out lures, and they're small enough where it really doesn't affect the action of the lure. In fact, it enhances it. It just makes the process easier rather than retying. For the fly fishermen out there, this is a typical fly leader rig if you're casting. Certainly if you're trolling from a boat or you're dangling from a boat, you don't need to do this kind of an elaborate rig. But for casters, you use your flutter spoon, dart, or fly. Again, same thing, attached with a small snap or non-slip mono loop knot. You have 12 inches of tippet at 6 pounds. knotted to a 12-inch section of about 12 pounds. Some people put a split shot in here to help the flutter spoon or whatever get down lower in the water. The 12-inch section of 12 pound is connected to 36-inch section of 20 pound, and that of course is knotted to a full sink or sink tick fly line. This is a common setup for fly fishing. We're going to talk about lures and flies. We're going to start with shad darts, which are emblematic to shad fishing. They're made in weights from 1/64 of an ounce to well over 3/4 of an ounce. You see these heavy weights in some of the bigger rivers in the mid-Atlantic. Common Merrimack weights range between 1/32 of an ounce to about 1/4 of an ounce. Heavier darts can be fished alone or on a very light outfit. Lighter darts can be more easily cast on a leader rig, which I showed, or in tandem. You can sometimes attach two darts together and get enough weight for a decent cast. A dart on a small snap or a mono loop knot will dart more than one tied with a cinch knot, which is why it's stressed that you use a very small snap there so you can get as maximum movement as possible, which seems to make a difference in shad fishing. And Merrimack darts are sometimes stripped of tail dressings. The picture I have up here is a typical dart with bucktail tied on the end, but you see a lot of darts up this way where they cut the threads and leave the hook exposed. Gold hook darts are better than tinned, and we'll talk about why that is here in a moment. The next lure we're going to talk about is flutter spoons. It's my favorite shad lure. A flutter spoon is basically just a willow leaf blade soldered to a light wire Aberdeen hook, which is what this is right here. This is an Eagle Claw 202 ELA. The sizes of them correspond to the blade, so they range from double aught to twos, with zeros and ones being the average Merrimack sizes for the willow leaf blades. They're pretty flexible. They can be tuned with slight bending. What I usually do when I snap on a new flutter spoon is drop it in the water, and I just move the rod tip back and forth so I see what kind of action it has. If it's not fluttering enough for me, I do pick it up, and usually I put a bend into the willow leaf, and it'll help with a flutter at slower speeds. You might find that nice flutter that you have at slower speeds turns into a wild spin when the water's cranking, so you do want to probably adjust your flutter spoon to the conditions that you're experiencing. A flutter spoon is far too light to cast. It requires a casting weight, and the last bullet I have here is a light wire hook. The light wire hook using a flutter spoon can open on a snag. That might seem like a negative. It's actually a good thing. It's one of the reasons why I really like flutter spoons. In shad fishing, you're fishing very close to the bottom. You want to be just off it. Snags are common. With a flutter spoon, if you get a snag and it isn't embedded in anything and you can't shake it off, a lot of times if you apply steady pressure with your rod, you can open up this Aberdeen hook far enough where you can get your lure back, break out some hemostats, bend it back into place, and you're good to go. It's very rare you open a hook up on a fish, even the bigger hens. So, you know, it's not like if you're using this lighter wire, you're going to risk losing a decent fish. But it certainly saves you some time, money, and aggravation from losing your offerings and having to re-rig. The next lure we're going to talk about is the standard grub and jig, and this isn't typically used for shad fishing, or you don't really see a lot of people talk about this. But I had an experience years ago of being at Spiro's and watching a gentleman just catching 5 fish to my 1, and I had to walk over and ask him what he was doing, and he showed me this combination. He called it a walleye jig. You can find these little tiny jigs, at least in Cabela's, in the walleye section. They're usually in there with the walleye stuff or small panfish jigs. Again, they're surprisingly effective. The biggest shad that I have caught were caught on this lure. I use jigs from 1/16 of an ounce to 1/8 of an ounce. I do use a casting weight on a leader rig, and I also use 1-inch grubs here. They're very small, and you basically fish this like a dart. So if you have not used this, this is a great little thing to add to your arsenal. It can really help you out. If you fly fish, most brightly colored flies will work. Clouses or other weighted flies are best. Here's a small sampling of some popular shad type flies. You see all kinds of varieties. Gold is usually a good color combination to use with some gold dumbbell eyes for small clousers. Speaking of gold, gold is the best finish for hooks and blades. Fluorescent color combinations are the best. You do see some shad lures that are black or black and purple or purple. I found on the Merrimack, in my own experience, that chartreuse is the best. If it ain't chartreuse, it ain't no use, is a common saying, and that's certainly something I ascribe to on the Merrimack. You can create your own lures. It's a fun off-season hobby. It's cheaper to make them than buy them. There's some instructions on the internet for making willow leaf flutter spoons. Again, you're basically just soldering a hook to a willow leaf blade. You can buy do-it molds to make your own shad darts. You can buy shad darts unpainted and just use hobby enamel paint or even just nail polish to paint them. I mentioned this earlier in the presentation. I want to mention it again. Upstream of the 495 bridge in Haverhill, you cannot use any lead in your lures, so your shad darts need to be made out of something else. Surfland on Plum Island carries shad darts made of tin. A little bit about technique. The standard bread and butter cast for shad fishing is 90 degrees across current with a swing during a slow retrieve. You should retrieve slow enough just to keep your offering off the bottom. What you might want to do is get your offering down so you're bumping bottom, then pick up the pace just a little bit to lift it up so you don't snag. The retrieval action varies from a slow and steady retrieve to a slight rod twitching to really pronounced jigging motions. You'll see some guys fishing that look like they're jigging for cod. It's not a technique that works personally for me, but I've seen some guys use it very effectively. A little bit about etiquette. Shad fishing can be very positional, meaning in a picture like this with 4 guys lined up, the gentleman here in yellow could be catching all the fish and the others not. Sometimes the exact position you're in makes all the difference. With any fishing, standard etiquette applies, which means you never interfere with someone who was there before you, someone who was already fishing. Basic politeness counts here. If you step up, make contact with the person, ask if you can step in next to them and fish. Many people can fish close together. If you've ever fished the mouth of the Merrimack in May, you know what I'm talking about. It requires everyone to pay attention and cast in turn. It certainly can be done shad fishing as well. A little bit about stewardship. All the spots that we talked about here experience significant plastic pollution from the cities upstream. Helping to clean up is a great way to give back. It's good for fishing mojo. Rocks Village has a cleanup schedule for Saturday, April 13th at 9 o'clock a.m. It's the lower part of the tide, which allows us to get down a little bit and get the plastic at the water's edge. We'd love it if you could attend. Many hands make short work of this. And we usually just have some coffee and donuts. And if you're new to the sport or new to that spot, or even if you're experienced, it's a great way to share with some of the people around there about Rocks Village. And it's a beautiful spot that deserves some stewardship. The Plum Island Surfcasters is putting together a little club outing at shad fishing at Rocks Village. That's on the following Saturday after the cleanup on April 20th. 8 o'clock a.m. is the best time to get there to meet, to get down to the water for the dropping tide. So we'd love to see people there. So thank you very much for watching. Appreciate it. If you have any questions, you can contact Eric Roach at EROACH1970 @gmail.com. Thank you very much.